The year is 1506, and deep within the Vatican's most guarded chambers, a cardinal holds a document that could shatter everything we believe about Earth's ancient past. His hands tremble not from age, but from the weight of what he's seeing. A map. Not just any map, but one that depicts continents where oceans should be, cities where deserts now stretch, and rivers flowing through lands that haven't existed for millennia. This isn't a map of our world. This is a map of the world before the flood. What if I told you that hidden within the Vatican's secret archives lies evidence of a civilization so advanced, so completely erased from history, that its very existence threatens the foundation of everything we've been taught? What if the Great Flood wasn't just a biblical story, but a historical reset that wiped clean an entire epoch of human achievement? And what if the Church has been guarding the proof for over 500 years? Welcome to a mystery that will challenge your understanding of human history itself. I'm about to take you on a journey through centuries of concealment, where ancient cartographers drew impossible coastlines, where medieval scholars whispered of lands that time forgot, and where the most powerful institution on Earth may have buried the greatest archaeological discovery in human history. Because what we're dealing with here isn't just a map, it's a window into a lost world. My name is Alex, and for the past 3 years, I've been investigating historical anomalies that mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge. I've traveled to archives in 12 countries, interviewed dozens of researchers, and uncovered evidence that will make you question everything you thought you knew about our planet's past. Today, I'm going to share with you the most explosive discovery of my career. A discovery so profound that it's been systematically hidden, denied, and discredited by those who fear what it might reveal. But first, let me paint you a picture of what we're really talking about here. Imagine opening an ancient chest and finding a photograph of your great-grandfather standing next to a building that was supposedly never built. That's the level of impossibility we're dealing with. These aren't just old maps with minor inaccuracies. These are detailed cartographic works that show geological features, river systems, and land masses that, according to our current understanding of history, no human should have been able to map. The Piri-Reis map of 1513 shows Antarctica without ice. The Mercator map of 1569 depicts Arctic islands that weren't officially discovered until the 20th century. The Boach map of 1754 reveals the subglacial topography of Antarctica with stunning accuracy. But these famous examples are just the tip of the iceberg. Because buried in the Vatican's archives, there may be something far more extraordinary, a complete atlas of the pre-Diluvian world. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like conspiracy theory territory, ancient aliens, lost civilizations, cover-ups by shadowy organizations. But before you dismiss this, consider this fact. The Vatican's secret archives contain over 35,000 volumes of documents spanning 12 centuries. That's roughly 53 miles of shelving, and less than 1% has ever been made available to researchers. What exactly are they hiding in those remaining 34,650 volumes? The Church itself admits that these archives contain materials that could revolutionize our understanding of history. In 2019, Pope Francis opened a small section dealing with World War II, and the revelations were staggering. If they're willing to keep recent history secret for decades, what might they be hiding about ancient history? Documents that are not decades old, but millennia old. Here's where the story gets interesting. In 1492, the same year Columbus sailed to the Americas, a Genoese cartographer named Giovanni Battista Agnese created a series of maps that defied explanation. These weren't rough sketches or artistic interpretations. They were precise mathematical representations of coastlines that wouldn't be accurately surveyed for another 400 years. The level of detail was so extraordinary that modern oceanographers have confirmed their accuracy using satellite imagery. But Agnese wasn't working alone. Historical records show that he had access to source materials held within the Vatican Library. materials that were already ancient when he consulted them, materials that depicted a world that no longer existed. The implications are staggering. If accurate maps of our planet existed before the age of exploration, who created them? How did they achieve such precision without modern surveying equipment? And most importantly, what happened to the civilization that produced them? This is where the Great Flood enters our story. Not as a religious allegory, but as a historical event that has been documented by over 500 cultures worldwide. The Sumerians called it the Abzu. The Greeks spoke of Deucalion's flood. The Hindu texts describe the Pralaya. The Aboriginal Australians tell of the Great Inundation. These aren't variations of the same story passed down through cultural exchange. These are independent accounts of the same catastrophic event. Geological evidence supports this global catastrophe. Core samples from the Greenland ice sheet show evidence of massive flooding around 11,600 years ago. Marine fossils have been found at elevations of over 14,000 feet in the Himalayas. Megalithic structures worldwide show water damage patterns consistent with massive inundation. The scientific evidence for a global flood event is overwhelming. But here's what mainstream archaeology won't tell you. The flood wasn't the beginning of human civilization. It was the end of a previous one. A civilization so advanced that its maps were still being used by European explorers 5,000 years later. A civilization whose knowledge was so profound that the Catholic Church felt compelled to hide it from the world. The evidence begins with a man named Cardinal Giovanni Battista de' Rossi. In 1578, he was appointed as the Vatican's chief archivist, tasked with cataloguing and organizing the Church's vast collection of ancient documents. What he found in those archives changed him forever. According to his private journals, discovered only in 1963, de' Rossi came across a collection of maps that he described as impossibly accurate depictions of lands that have been beneath the waters since the time of Noah. These weren't medieval interpretations of biblical geography. These were detailed cartographic works showing river deltas, mountain ranges, and coastal features with precision that rivaled modern satellite mapping. De' Rossi's journals describe maps showing the Mediterranean basin as dry land, the English Channel as a river valley, and vast continents in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. But de' Rossi's discovery was just the beginning. Over the next 2 centuries, a secret network of Vatican scholars worked to piece together what they believed was a complete atlas of the pre-Diluvian world. They called it the Codex Diluvium, the Flood Codex. And according to fragmentary records that have leaked from the Vatican over the centuries, this codex contains maps, texts, and astronomical charts from a civilization that predates our current understanding of human history by thousands of years. The existence of this codex explains many historical anomalies that have puzzled researchers for centuries. How did Polynesian navigators cross thousands of miles of open ocean with pinpoint accuracy? How did ancient civilizations on opposite sides of the planet develop identical architectural techniques? How did pre-Columbian Americans know about Old World animals that supposedly didn't exist in the Americas? The answer may be that they were all working from the same source material. Maps and knowledge preserved from a time when the world looked completely different, when sea levels were 400 feet lower, when the Sahara was a grassland, when vast landmasses connected continents that are now separated by oceans. This knowledge wasn't lost accidentally, it was hidden deliberately, because the implications of pre-Diluvian maps go far beyond simple cartography. They suggest that human civilization is far older and far more advanced than we've been told. They imply that our current technological age isn't humanity's first attempt at global civilization, and they raise uncomfortable questions about who was really in charge of that earlier world. The Catholic Church, as the inheritor of much ancient knowledge, found itself in an impossible position. How do you reconcile maps showing advanced civilizations with religious doctrine that places human creation at a specific point in time? How do you explain technological capabilities that seem to exceed even our modern achievements? The solution was simple. You don't explain them, you hide them. But hiding knowledge in the modern age is becoming increasingly difficult. Satellite imagery, deep-sea exploration, and archaeological techniques are revealing evidence of the pre-Diluvian world, whether the Vatican likes it or not. Submerged ruins off the coast of Japan, India, and the Mediterranean. Megalithic structures that show evidence of advanced engineering. Geological formations that suggest rapid, catastrophic change. The pieces of the puzzle are coming together, and they're painting a picture that challenges everything we think we know about human history. A picture of a world where advanced civilizations thrived before a global catastrophe reset human development. A world whose maps were so accurate that they continued to guide explorers thousands of years after the civilization that created them had vanished beneath the waves. And at the center of this mystery sits the Vatican, guardian of humanity's most profound secrets, keeper of knowledge that could rewrite every history book ever written. The question isn't whether they possess maps of the pre-Diluvian world. The question is what else they're hiding, and why they've gone to such extraordinary lengths to keep it secret. Because if these maps exist, if they show what I believe they show, then human civilization is far stranger, far older, and far more remarkable than we ever imagined. And the flood that destroyed that ancient world may not have been the end of the story. It may have been just the beginning of the greatest cover-up in human history. The trail of evidence doesn't end with Cardinal de Rossi's journals. In fact, that's where the real mystery begins. Because what de Rossi discovered in 1578 set in motion a chain of events that would span centuries, involving some of the most powerful figures in European history, all united by a single, terrifying realization. The world we think we know is built on the ruins of something far greater. Let me take you deeper into this rabbit hole, because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally alter how you see our planet's history. In 1623, 45 years after de Rossi's initial discovery, Pope Urban VIII issued a papal bull that has never been fully explained by Vatican historians. This decree, known as the Sanctum Silentium, established what the Church called perpetual discretion regarding certain cartographic materials. The language is deliberately vague, but the implications are crystal clear. Specific maps and geographical documents were to be classified at the highest level of church secrecy, accessible only to a select group of cardinals known as the Custodes Arcanum, the keepers of secrets. Why would the Pope issue such an extreme directive about maps? What could possibly be so dangerous about geographical information that it required the highest level of church censorship? The answer lies in what these maps revealed about the true age and sophistication of human civilization. But here's where the story takes an even more intriguing turn. The Custodes Arcanum weren't just passive guardians of ancient knowledge. They were active researchers, secretly working to decode and understand the implications of what they'd inherited. Historical records show that throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, the Vatican funded numerous expeditions under the guise of missionary work. These weren't religious missions. They were archaeological surveys, searching for physical evidence of the pre-Diluvian world depicted in their hidden maps. One of the most significant of these expeditions was led by Father Giuseppe Simone Assemani in 1717. Officially, Assemani was traveling to the Middle East to collect ancient manuscripts for the Vatican Library. But his private correspondence, discovered in the 1980s during renovations of the Vatican's secret archives, tells a different story. Assemani was specifically searching for what he called stone witnesses, megalithic structures that would confirm the accuracy of the Church's pre-Diluvian maps, and he found them. Assemani's encrypted reports describe discovering massive stone foundations beneath the sands of modern-day Iraq, structures that aligned perfectly with cities marked on the Vatican's secret maps. He wrote of finding carved stones depicting constellations in positions that wouldn't occur for thousands of years, and underground chambers containing what he described as charts of the heavens as they appeared before the waters rose. But Assamani's discoveries came with a price. His final report, dated 1719, carries a warning that chills me to this day. The knowledge contained within these ancient halls is not meant for our age. There are truths that would shatter the foundations upon which our world is built. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. What did Assamani find that terrified him so completely? What knowledge was so dangerous that even a man dedicated to uncovering ancient truths felt compelled to recommend its continued concealment? The answer may lie in the astronomical component of these pre-Diluvian maps. Because they weren't just showing geographical features. They were showing the night sky as it appeared thousands of years before any known civilization should have been capable of such precise astronomical observation. Star charts that accounted for precession, planetary movements, and celestial mechanics with a sophistication that rivals our modern understanding. This is where the Vatican's secret becomes truly explosive. Because if these maps are accurate, they prove that advanced astronomical knowledge existed in the ancient world. Knowledge that could only have been acquired through centuries of systematic observation and mathematical calculation. Knowledge that implies a level of scientific development that makes our current timeline of human civilization completely untenable. Consider what this means. The precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that changes our view of the stars, takes 25,120 years to complete one full cycle. To map this accurately, you need not just advanced mathematics, but continuous observation spanning multiple millennia. You need institutional knowledge passed down through generations of astronomers. You need a stable, sophisticated civilization with the resources and dedication to pursue long-term scientific projects. The ancient maps in the Vatican's possession show star positions that correspond to dates ranging from 15,000 to 10,000 years ago. They show constellations as they appeared before the last ice age ended, before the great melt that raised sea levels worldwide, before the global flood that destroyed the civilization that created them. But there's something even more remarkable about these astronomical charts. They don't just show individual star positions, they show the entire celestial sphere mapped with mathematical precision, divided into coordinate systems that wouldn't be reinvented until the work of Hipparchus in the 2nd century BCE. These ancient astronomers weren't just stargazers. They were sophisticated scientists working with mathematical tools and conceptual frameworks that we assume were impossible in the ancient world. The Vatican's astronomers understood the implications immediately. If accurate star charts existed from 15,000 years ago, it meant that advanced human civilization was far older than biblical chronology allowed. It meant that the flood described in Genesis wasn't the beginning of human history, but the end of a previous chapter. A chapter that the Church had been systematically erasing from human memory for over 1,000 years. This explains the extreme secrecy surrounding these documents. It's not just about protecting religious doctrine. It's about protecting an entire worldview that places modern civilization at the pinnacle of human achievement. Because if these maps are real, if they show what I believe they show, then our current technological age isn't humanity's first attempt at global civilization. It's our second attempt, maybe our third, maybe one of many. The implications ripple outward like shockwaves. Every archaeological site that's been dismissed as impossible becomes possible. Every ancient structure that seems too advanced for its supposed age suddenly makes sense. Every myth and legend about golden ages and lost civilizations transforms from fantasy into historical record. Take the Giza pyramid complex. Mainstream archaeology dates it to around 2500 BCE. But geological evidence suggests the Sphinx shows water erosion patterns consistent with much earlier construction. What if the Vatican's maps show the Giza Plateau as it appeared before the flood, when the region was lush and green? What if these monuments weren't built by the civilization we know, but were inherited by them from the pre-Diluvian world? Or consider the megalithic sites scattered across the globe. Stonehenge, Göbekli Tepe, Sacsayhuaman, Easter Island. These structures share architectural techniques and astronomical alignments that suggest a common source of knowledge. What if that source wasn't cultural diffusion between primitive societies, but inherited wisdom from a global civilization that existed before the flood reset human development? The Vatican's secret maps may provide the missing link that connects all these mysteries. They may show us the world as it really was before catastrophe struck, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, when vast continents existed where we now see only ocean, when human civilization had reached heights that we're only now beginning to approach again. But accessing this knowledge requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of historical records and the institutions that control them. It requires us to ask difficult questions about why certain information has been hidden, who benefits from keeping it secret, and what might happen if these ancient truths were finally revealed to the world. The Vatican isn't just a religious institution, it's one of the world's oldest continuous governments with diplomatic relations, financial interests, and political influence that spans the globe. It has survived the fall of empires, the rise of nation-states, and the scientific revolution. It has adapted to every major change in human society while maintaining its core mission, the preservation and control of knowledge. From this perspective, the Church's possession of pre-Diluvian maps isn't surprising. It's inevitable. As the inheritor of ancient wisdom traditions, as the repository of texts and documents from across the Mediterranean world, the Vatican would naturally have acquired the most complete records of the pre-flood civilization. The question isn't whether they have these maps. The question is what they've done with the knowledge contained within them. And here's where the story becomes truly fascinating, because the Vatican hasn't just been hiding this information, they've been using it. The great age of exploration, the sudden burst of geographical knowledge that allowed European navigators to cross oceans with unprecedented accuracy, may not have been based on contemporary discoveries at all. It may have been based on ancient maps that showed the world as it really was, beneath the waters that rose to cover the pre-Diluvian lands. Columbus didn't sail west into the unknown. He sailed west following routes that had been mapped thousands of years before he was born. The Portuguese navigators who rounded Africa weren't pioneering new sea lanes. They were following coastal routes that had been charted by civilizations that understood ocean currents, wind patterns, and celestial navigation with mathematical precision. This explains the greatest mystery of the age of exploration. How did European navigators achieve such remarkable accuracy so quickly? How did they go from coastal sailing to transoceanic voyages in just a few decades? How did they know where to look for new continents, new islands, new trade routes? The answer may be that they weren't discovering new lands at all. They were rediscovering old ones, guided by maps that showed the world before the flood changed everything. Maps that had been carefully preserved by the one institution with the resources, motivation, and continuity to maintain such knowledge across millennia of upheaval. The Church's role as a navigator of both souls and seas becomes even more intriguing when we examine the timing of certain papal decisions. In 1493, just 1 year after Columbus returned from his first voyage, Pope Alexander VI issued the Inter Caetera Bull, dividing the New World between Spain and Portugal. This wasn't just political maneuvering. This was the action of an institution that already knew what lay across the Atlantic, that understood the true scope of the lands being discovered. How else do you explain the Pope's confidence in drawing lines across unknown oceans, in promising entire continents to European powers before anyone had mapped them? Unless, of course, they had already been mapped. Unless the Vatican possessed charts that showed exactly what Columbus would find before he ever set sail. This pattern repeats throughout the age of exploration. Portuguese navigators rounded the Cape of Good Hope with remarkable precision, as if they knew exactly where they were going. Spanish conquistadors arrived in the New World with geographical knowledge that seems impossible given their limited reconnaissance. Dutch explorers mapped Pacific islands with an accuracy that suggests they were working from existing charts. But the most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source: the maps themselves. Not the famous examples like Piri Reis or Mercator, but the hundreds of lesser-known charts that guided European exploration. Maps that showed geographical features with impossible accuracy, coastlines surveyed with mathematical precision, river systems mapped down to their smallest tributaries. Take the Diogo Ribeiro map of 1529. This chart shows the Pacific coast of the Americas with stunning detail, including bays, headlands, and island chains that wouldn't be officially surveyed until the 18th century. Ribeiro claimed to have compiled his map from Spanish sources, but those sources had supposedly only made brief coastal surveys. How did they achieve such comprehensive accuracy from limited observations? The answer becomes clear when you understand that Ribeiro wasn't creating new maps. He was copying old ones. Maps that showed the world as it existed before the Great Catastrophe, when sea levels were hundreds of feet lower, when vast continental shelves were dry land, when river systems followed completely different courses. These pre-Diluvian charts weren't just geographical curiosities. They were practical navigation tools that gave European explorers an almost supernatural advantage over their competitors. While other nations were sailing blind into unknown waters, the major Catholic powers were following routes that had been mapped with mathematical precision thousands of years earlier. This explains the sudden shift in global power that occurred during the Age of Exploration. Nations with access to Vatican knowledge, or nations that could convince the Church to share selected information, gained enormous advantages in trade, conquest, and colonization. Nations without access to these ancient charts remained trapped in coastal waters, unable to compete with the oceanic empires that seemed to navigate by divine guidance. But the Church's use of pre-Diluvian knowledge wasn't limited to geography. Hidden within the Vatican's astronomical collections are star charts that guided navigation with unprecedented accuracy. These aren't medieval approximations or classical Greek observations. These are precise celestial maps that account for stellar positions across thousands of years, showing the night sky as it appeared during the height of the pre-flood civilization. Consider the navigational advantages this knowledge provided. Ancient astronomers had mapped not just individual stars, but entire stellar neighborhoods. They understood the complex relationships between celestial bodies, the precise timing of stellar risings and settings, the mathematical relationships that govern planetary movements. This wasn't primitive stargazing. This was sophisticated astronomical science applied to practical navigation. European explorers weren't just following compass bearings and dead reckoning. They were navigating by star positions calculated thousands of years in advance, using astronomical knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered until the development of modern astrophysics. They could predict celestial events, calculate their position with extraordinary precision, and navigate across vast oceanic distances with confidence that bordered on the supernatural. The implications go beyond navigation. If the Vatican possessed accurate astronomical charts from the pre-Diluvian period, they also possessed the mathematical and scientific knowledge that created those charts. They had access to geometric principles, trigonometric calculations, and observational techniques that were supposedly unknown in the ancient world. This knowledge wasn't just theoretical. It was being applied to practical problems throughout the Renaissance and beyond. The sudden burst of scientific advancement that characterized this period may not have been the result of individual genius or cultural renaissance. It may have been the controlled release of ancient knowledge, carefully doled out to advance church interests while maintaining the illusion of contemporary discovery. Think about the great scientific figures of the Renaissance: Copernicus, who revolutionized astronomy with his heliocentric model. Galileo, whose telescopic observations confirmed ancient astronomical theories. Kepler, whose laws of planetary motion described relationships that had been encoded in pre-Diluvian star charts. Were these men discovering new truths, or were they rediscovering old ones with the Church's carefully managed guidance? The evidence suggests that many Renaissance discoveries were actually revelations of ancient knowledge. The mathematical principles that enabled the scientific revolution, the geometric insights that powered architectural innovation, the astronomical observations that transformed our understanding of the cosmos, all of these may have been preserved in the Vatican's secret archives, waiting for the right moment to be discovered again. But the Church faced a delicate balancing act. They needed to release enough ancient knowledge to maintain their influence and advance their interests, but not so much that people began asking uncomfortable questions about where this knowledge originated. They needed to appear as guardians of contemporary learning, while secretly drawing from sources that were thousands of years old. This explains the Vatican's complex relationship with scientific advancement. They supported certain discoveries while suppressing others, not based on religious doctrine alone, but based on how much ancient knowledge each revelation might expose. Scientists who stayed within acceptable boundaries received church patronage and protection. Those who pushed too far into dangerous territory faced persecution and censorship. Galileo's trial takes on new meaning in this context. His crime wasn't just challenging religious doctrine about the Earth's position in the cosmos. His crime was coming too close to revealing that the Church had possessed accurate astronomical knowledge all along, knowledge that came from sources they couldn't publicly acknowledge without undermining their entire historical narrative. The same pattern appears throughout history. Scientists, explorers, and scholars who approached too closely to the truth about ancient knowledge found themselves facing church opposition, not because their discoveries were wrong, but because they were too right. They were uncovering evidence of the pre-Diluvian civilization that the Vatican had been systematically concealing for over a millennium. This brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of the Vatican's secret, the astronomical component of the pre-Diluvian maps. These aren't just geographical charts showing where continents and oceans were located before the flood. They're comprehensive star atlases showing the night sky as it appeared during the height of the ancient civilization. What makes these charts so remarkable isn't just their accuracy, but their scope. They show stellar positions across multiple millennia, accounting for the slow precession of Earth's axis that changes our view of the stars over thousands of years. They map not just individual constellations, but the entire celestial sphere, divided into coordinate systems that demonstrate a mathematical sophistication that rivals our modern understanding. But here's what makes these charts truly extraordinary. They don't just show the stars as they appeared from Earth. They show stellar relationships and planetary movements from multiple perspectives, as if the ancient astronomers had access to observational points throughout the solar system. This suggests a level of astronomical knowledge that goes far beyond anything we associate with ancient civilizations. The pre-Diluvian astronomers understood concepts that we've only recently rediscovered: the complex gravitational relationships between planetary bodies, the mathematical principles that govern orbital mechanics, the precise timing of celestial events across vast spans of time. They had mapped not just our immediate cosmic neighborhood, but the broader structure of our galaxy. This knowledge wasn't just academic, it was being used for practical purposes that we can barely comprehend. The ancient civilization had developed navigation techniques based on stellar relationships that allowed them to travel vast distances with unprecedented accuracy. They understood seasonal patterns, tidal relationships, and atmospheric phenomena in ways that enabled them to predict weather, plan agricultural cycles, and coordinate activities across global distances. The Vatican's possession of this astronomical knowledge explains many historical mysteries that have puzzled researchers for centuries. How did ancient civilizations coordinate activities across vast distances? How did they align monuments with celestial events that occur only once every thousands of years? How did they develop calendar systems that account for complex astronomical cycles? The answer is that they had inherited knowledge from the pre-Diluvian civilization, knowledge that had been preserved and carefully controlled by institutions like the Catholic Church. The great monuments of the ancient world weren't built by primitive societies struggling to understand basic astronomy. They were built by civilizations that had access to sophisticated star charts and mathematical principles preserved from an earlier age. But this astronomical knowledge came with implications that went far beyond navigation and monument building. If accurate star charts existed from 15,000 years ago, it meant that advanced human civilization was far older than biblical chronology allowed. It meant that the flood described in religious texts wasn't the beginning of human history, but the end of a previous chapter that had been deliberately erased from human memory. The Church found itself in an impossible position. They possessed knowledge that could revolutionize human understanding of our past, but releasing that knowledge would undermine the religious and historical narrative that formed the foundation of their authority. The solution was to maintain absolute secrecy while carefully controlling the release of selected information to advance their interests. This explains the Vatican's obsession with astronomical observation throughout history. The Gregorian calendar reform, the establishment of the Vatican Observatory, the Church's complex relationship with astronomical discovery, all of these can be understood as attempts to manage and control the release of ancient knowledge while maintaining the illusion that such knowledge was being discovered for the first time. The pre-Diluvian star charts in the Vatican's possession represent one of the most profound secrets in human history. They prove that advanced astronomical science existed in the ancient world, that sophisticated civilizations were mapping the cosmos with mathematical precision thousands of years before such capabilities were supposed to exist. They demonstrate that human knowledge is far older and far more advanced than we've been led to believe. But they also represent a terrible burden for the institution that possesses them, because acknowledging their existence would require rewriting every history book, reconsidering every archaeological discovery, and confronting the possibility that our current technological civilization isn't humanity's first attempt at understanding the cosmos, but merely our latest attempt to recover knowledge that was lost when the waters rose and the old world drowned. The implications of these astronomical revelations extend far beyond academic curiosity. They suggest that we're living in the shadow of a civilization that understood cosmic forces we're only beginning to grasp. But the Vatican's secret goes deeper than ancient star charts and pre-Diluvian geography. Hidden within their archives may be evidence of technologies that challenge our understanding of what was possible in the ancient world. In 1887, a maintenance worker renovating the lower levels of the Vatican Library made a discovery that would be immediately classified and buried for over a century. Behind a false wall in what was supposed to be unused storage space, he found a chamber containing documents that described engineering principles and mechanical devices that seemed to belong to a far more advanced civilization than anything known from the ancient world. These weren't primitive sketches or philosophical musings about machines. They were detailed technical drawings with mathematical annotations, showing devices that harness natural forces in ways that our modern science is only beginning to understand. Water-powered mechanisms that generated what can only be described as electrical energy. Geometric structures that focused and amplified sound waves for purposes that remain unclear. Most remarkably, diagrams showing the construction of vessels designed for what the ancient texts described as journeys through the upper waters of heaven. The discovery was immediately reported to Pope Leo XIII, who ordered the chamber sealed and all materials transferred to the deepest levels of the secret archives. The maintenance worker was transferred to a remote monastery, where he lived under a vow of silence until his death 40 years later. The only record of his discovery comes from the private journal of Cardinal Mariano Rampolla, the Vatican Secretary of State, who wrote, "We have uncovered evidence of capabilities that exceed our own understanding. These documents must remain hidden until humanity is prepared for such knowledge, if indeed we ever shall be." But Cardinal Rampola's concerns went beyond the technological implications of these discoveries. The documents weren't just describing advanced machines. They were describing a civilization that had integrated technology with what they called the harmonies of creation, in ways that suggest a fundamentally different understanding of how the universe operates. The pre-Diluvian engineers weren't just building machines. They were working with forces that we classify as separate phenomena: gravity, magnetism, sound, light, as if they understood these as different expressions of a single underlying principle. Their devices didn't fight against natural laws. They worked in harmony with cosmic forces in ways that made their achievements seem almost magical to later civilizations. This explains many archaeological anomalies that mainstream science struggles to address. The massive stone blocks at Baalbek, some weighing over 800 tons, moved and positioned with precision that challenges our understanding of ancient engineering capabilities. The acoustic properties of Mayan temples that can amplify whispered words across vast distances. The electromagnetic anomalies detected at sites like Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. These weren't primitive societies struggling with basic engineering problems. These were civilizations that had inherited knowledge from the pre-Diluvian world, knowledge that enabled them to work with forces and principles that we're only beginning to rediscover through our most advanced scientific research. The Vatican's possession of these technical documents explains their historical relationship with scientific discovery. They weren't just suppressing knowledge that contradicted religious doctrine. They were carefully managing the release of information that could reveal the true sophistication of ancient civilization. Each scientific breakthrough had to be carefully timed and controlled to maintain the illusion of progressive discovery, while preventing anyone from asking too many questions about where such knowledge might have originated. Consider the sudden advancement in architectural techniques during the medieval period. The construction of Gothic cathedrals required engineering knowledge that supposedly didn't exist in Europe at the time. The mathematical principles governing flying buttresses, the precise calculations needed for massive stone vaults, the understanding of structural forces required to build towers that reached unprecedented heights. Where did this knowledge come from? How did medieval builders suddenly acquire capabilities that had been lost since Roman times? The answer may be that they had access to ancient texts describing engineering principles preserved from the pre-Diluvian civilization. The Vatican, as the patron of cathedral construction, may have been selectively releasing technical knowledge to achieve architectural goals, while maintaining strict secrecy about the source of that knowledge. The same pattern appears in other fields. The sudden advancement in metallurgy that enabled the creation of Damascus steel, the development of optical instruments that revolutionized astronomy, the mathematical insights that powered the Renaissance. All of these may have been controlled releases of ancient knowledge, carefully managed to advance church interests while concealing the true age and sophistication of human civilization. But the technological documents hidden in the Vatican archives describe capabilities that go far beyond medieval engineering. They show machines that worked with energy sources we don't fully understand, devices that manipulated gravitational forces, instruments that could influence weather patterns across vast regions. Most intriguingly, they describe transportation methods that allowed the pre-Diluvian civilization to travel not just across oceans, but through what the ancient texts call the celestial waters. These references to celestial travel aren't metaphorical. The technical drawings show craft designed to operate in environments with different atmospheric pressures, different gravitational conditions, different electromagnetic fields. The pre-Diluvian engineers understood space travel not as a theoretical possibility, but as a practical reality. They had developed technologies that allowed them to explore beyond Earth's boundaries thousands of years before we achieved our first tentative steps into space. This knowledge was so far beyond medieval understanding that the Church had no choice but to classify it at the highest levels of secrecy. Revealing such capabilities would have undermined not just religious doctrine, but the entire framework of human knowledge that had been carefully constructed to hide the true achievements of the ancient world. The Vatican's astronomical observations take on new meaning in this context. They weren't just studying the stars for calendar purposes or navigation. They were using ancient knowledge to understand cosmic phenomena that had been mapped and explored by the Pre-Diluvian civilization. Their secret observatories weren't just looking at distant objects. They were monitoring locations that had been visited and documented thousands of years earlier. This explains the Church's complex relationship with space exploration in the modern era. They've maintained one of the world's most advanced astronomical research facilities, staffed by scientists who combine cutting-edge technology with access to historical knowledge that spans millennia. They're not just participating in humanity's expansion into space, they're guiding it, using ancient maps to navigate territories that were explored long before our current civilization developed the capability to leave Earth's surface. But the technological implications of the Vatican's secret go beyond individual devices or capabilities. The pre-Diluvian civilization had developed what can only be described as a completely different approach to science and engineering. Instead of viewing natural forces as obstacles to overcome, they understood them as expressions of cosmic harmony that could be worked with and channeled for beneficial purposes. Their technology wasn't based on brute force or the consumption of resources. It was based on resonance, harmony, and the amplification of natural energies. They had learned to work with planetary forces, solar radiation, and cosmic influences in ways that made their achievements sustainable and environmentally integrated. Their cities weren't scars on the landscape. They were expressions of natural harmony that enhanced rather than disrupted the ecological systems around them. This understanding of technology as harmony rather than conquest may explain why evidence of the pre-Diluvian civilization is so difficult to find. Their structures weren't built to dominate the environment. They were designed to work with natural forces in ways that made them almost invisible to later archaeological investigation. When the flood came, their cities didn't leave massive ruins. They dissolved back into the landscape as if they had never existed. But traces remain for those who know how to look. Geometric patterns in natural formations that suggest artificial enhancement. Electromagnetic anomalies that indicate the presence of ancient devices still functioning beneath the earth. Acoustic properties in caves and valleys that were clearly modified to amplify and focus sound waves for purposes we can only imagine. The Vatican's knowledge of these hidden traces explains their historical involvement in archaeological expeditions around the world. They weren't just collecting artifacts for their museums. They were mapping the remnants of the pre-Diluvian civilization, documenting locations where ancient technology might still be functioning, identifying sites where dangerous knowledge might be uncovered by unauthorized researchers. This global monitoring network explains many historical mysteries. Why did the Church establish missions in remote locations that seem to have no strategic or religious value? Why did Vatican expeditions consistently arrive at archaeological sites before other researchers? Why did certain discoveries disappear from academic record after initial reports? The answer is that the Vatican had maps showing exactly where to look for evidence of the ancient world. They knew which sites were likely to contain dangerous knowledge, which locations might reveal technologies that could disrupt the carefully managed narrative of human progress. They had to reach these sites first, not to destroy the evidence, but to control it, to ensure that any discoveries were properly contextualized and managed. But controlling archaeological evidence was only part of their challenge. The pre-Diluvian civilization had left other traces that were much harder to manage. They had influenced human genetics, human consciousness, human potential in ways that couldn't be buried or classified. They had awakened capabilities in the human species that would periodically surface throughout history, usually in individuals who posed a direct threat to established power structures. These weren't just gifted individuals or exceptional geniuses. These were people who seemed to have direct access to ancient knowledge, who could perform feats that appeared supernatural to their contemporaries, who could perceive and manipulate forces that conventional science couldn't explain. Throughout history, such individuals had been systematically identified, co-opted, or eliminated by institutions that understood the threat they represented. The Vatican's Inquisition takes on new meaning in this context. They weren't just suppressing religious heresy, they were identifying and controlling individuals who might have inherited genetic or consciousness traits from the pre-Diluvian civilization. People who could access ancient knowledge directly, without need for the carefully controlled release of information that maintained church authority. Joan of Arc, with her inexplicable military genius and claim of divine guidance. Leonardo da Vinci, whose technological insights seemed to come from sources he couldn't publicly acknowledge. Nostradamus, whose prophetic abilities suggested access to information about future events. These weren't isolated cases of individual brilliance. They were examples of ancient human potential surfacing in a world that had been systematically designed to suppress such capabilities. The Church's response was always the same: co-opt when possible, eliminate when necessary, but never allow such individuals to operate independently. Because independent access to ancient knowledge represented an existential threat to the entire system of controlled information that maintained institutional power. But the genetic legacy of the pre-Diluvian civilization couldn't be completely suppressed. It continued to surface in bloodlines, in families, in individuals who carried dormant capabilities that could be awakened under the right circumstances. The Vatican's genealogical research, their obsession with bloodlines and inheritance, their careful monitoring of certain families throughout history, all of this can be understood as an attempt to track and control the genetic legacy of the ancient world. This explains the Church's complex relationship with royal families, noble houses, and other hereditary power structures. They weren't just political alliances, they were genetic monitoring systems designed to identify and control individuals who might carry the biological inheritance of advanced ancient capabilities. The implications are staggering. If the pre-Diluvian civilization had developed not just advanced technology, but advanced human potential, then our current understanding of human capabilities is artificially limited. We've been conditioned to accept reduced potential as normal, to view extraordinary abilities as supernatural rather than natural expressions of human inheritance. The ancient knowledge hidden in the Vatican archives may include not just maps and technical drawings, but instruction manuals for awakening human capabilities that have been dormant for thousands of years. Techniques for enhancing consciousness, methods for accessing information through non-physical means, practices for manipulating energy and matter through focused intention. This knowledge was so dangerous to existing power structures that it had to be buried deeper than any other secret. Because while advanced technology could be controlled and managed, advanced human consciousness could not. Individuals with full access to their genetic inheritance from the pre-Diluvian world would be immune to the systems of control that had been carefully constructed over millennia. The Vatican's ultimate secret may not be about ancient maps or lost civilizations. It may be about human potential that has been systematically suppressed to maintain artificial scarcity and control. The pre-Diluvian world may have been populated not by primitive humans struggling with basic survival, but by beings who had developed capabilities that we can barely imagine. Their civilization didn't fall because of technological failure or environmental collapse. It was destroyed because it represented a threat to forces that preferred humanity to remain limited, controllable, and dependent on external authority for knowledge and guidance. The flood wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a reset designed to eliminate a level of human development that had become inconvenient to those who preferred to rule over limited beings rather than collaborate with unlimited ones. But the knowledge survived, hidden in archives, encoded in bloodlines, preserved in consciousness that occasionally surfaces in individuals who remember more than they should. The Vatican has spent centuries trying to control this inheritance, but control is becoming increasingly difficult in an age of global communication and expanded consciousness. The maps of the pre-Diluvian world may be just the beginning. Behind them lie secrets about human potential that could transform our understanding of what it means to be human. The question isn't just what the Vatican is hiding about ancient geography. The question is what they're hiding about ancient humanity, and what might happen if we remembered who we really are. The trail of evidence leads us to perhaps the most carefully guarded secret in the Vatican's possession. In 1634, 17 years after Father Assamani's terrifying discoveries in the Middle East, Pope Urban VIII received a visitor who would change the trajectory of the Church's relationship with ancient knowledge forever. This wasn't a cardinal or a scholar, but a Jesuit mathematician named Athanasius Kircher, whose reputation for deciphering ancient languages had reached the highest levels of church hierarchy. Kircher arrived at the Vatican carrying translations of texts that Assamani had discovered, but been too frightened to fully decode. These weren't just geographical descriptions or astronomical charts. They were instruction manuals, step-by-step guides for what the ancient texts called the awakening of the divine spark within mortal flesh. Techniques for expanding human consciousness beyond its normal limitations. Methods for accessing information that existed outside the boundaries of physical reality. But here's what makes Kircher's translations so remarkable. They weren't describing mystical practices or religious rituals. They were technical procedures, as precise and methodical as engineering blueprints. The pre-Diluvian civilization had developed systematic approaches to consciousness expansion that were based on mathematical principles, geometric patterns, and precise understanding of how human awareness could be enhanced and directed. These texts described meditation techniques that could extend human lifespan by centuries. Breathing practices that could enhance physical strength and mental clarity beyond normal human limits. Visualization methods that allowed individuals to perceive events occurring at vast distances or in different time periods. Most remarkably, they outlined procedures for what they called the marriage of consciousness with cosmic forces, techniques that enabled individuals to influence physical reality through focused intention. Kircher's initial reaction was skepticism. As a man of science and faith, he assumed these were primitive superstitions dressed up in sophisticated language. But the mathematical precision of the instructions, the detailed anatomical knowledge they displayed, and the systematic progression of techniques suggested something far more advanced than primitive mysticism. So Kircher did what any good scientist would do. He tested them. Working in secret within the Vatican's private chambers, he began experimenting with the consciousness techniques described in the ancient texts. What he discovered over the following months would shake him to his core and establish protocols that the Church maintains to this day. The techniques worked, not as religious experiences or psychological phenomena, but as reproducible methods for expanding human capabilities beyond their normal boundaries. Kircher found himself able to perceive information about events occurring hundreds of miles away. He could influence physical objects through focused intention. He could access knowledge that seemed to come from sources outside his normal education and experience. But the most disturbing discovery came when Kircher realized that these enhanced capabilities weren't supernatural gifts. They were normal human potentials that had been systematically suppressed. Every human being carried the genetic and neurological capacity for these expanded abilities. The pre-Diluvian civilization hadn't developed special powers. They had simply maintained access to capabilities that were the natural inheritance of the human species. Kircher's reports to Pope Urban VIII describe the profound implications of this discovery. If every human being possessed these latent capabilities, then the entire structure of civilization was based on artificial limitation. religious authority, political power, economic control. All of these systems depended on maintaining human beings in a state of reduced potential, unaware of their true capabilities. The Church faced an unprecedented crisis. They possessed knowledge that could liberate humanity from every form of external control, but using that knowledge would eliminate the very systems that maintained their own authority. The solution was, as elegant as it was, ruthless. Classify the consciousness techniques at the highest possible level of secrecy, while simultaneously developing methods to ensure that these capabilities could never spontaneously awaken in the general population. This led to the establishment of what Vatican insiders call the silentium profundum, the deep silence. Not just the concealment of ancient maps and technical knowledge, but the active suppression of human consciousness development. Educational systems designed to fragment attention and prevent the sustained focus necessary for consciousness expansion. Social structures that encourage competition and conflict rather than the cooperation that naturally emerges from expanded awareness. Cultural programming that taught people to seek authority outside themselves rather than developing their own inner wisdom. But the Church couldn't simply suppress these capabilities without understanding them. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, a secret network of Jesuit researchers worked to master the ancient consciousness techniques while ensuring that such knowledge never spread beyond carefully controlled circles. They established hidden schools within monasteries, where selected individuals were trained in what they called the sacred sciences of the soul. These weren't theological seminaries. They were advanced training centers for consciousness development, where students learned to access the same capabilities that had made the pre-Diluvian civilization so advanced. Remote viewing techniques that could gather intelligence across vast distances. Healing methods that could cure diseases through focused intention. Communication abilities that allowed direct mind-to-mind contact without physical proximity. The graduates of these programs became the Church's most valuable assets. They could gather information that no conventional intelligence network could obtain. They could influence events through methods that left no physical evidence. They could identify individuals who might spontaneously develop enhanced capabilities and either recruit them or neutralize them before they became threats to established order. But training individuals in advanced consciousness techniques created its own problems. Students who fully mastered these capabilities often began questioning the very systems they were supposed to serve. They could perceive the artificial nature of social control structures. They could sense the vast potential that was being suppressed in human beings worldwide. Many began to see their role not as protectors of church authority, but as guardians of human potential. This led to what historians now recognize as a series of internal conflicts within the church hierarchy, though the true nature of these disputes has never been publicly acknowledged. Cardinals and bishops who had been trained in consciousness techniques began advocating for the gradual release of ancient knowledge. They argued that humanity was ready to reclaim its full potential, that the age of artificial limitation should come to an end. The conservative faction, led by those who understood that expanded human consciousness would eliminate their power base, fought back with increasing desperation. They established what they called the Custodes Limitations, the guardians of limitation, whose sole purpose was to ensure that consciousness-expanding knowledge never escaped Vatican control. The conflict came to a head in 1773 with the suppression of the Jesuit order by Pope Clement XIV. The official reasons given for this action, political pressure from European monarchs, concerns about Jesuit independence, were merely surface explanations. The real reason was that the Jesuits had become too knowledgeable, too capable, too dangerous to existing power structures. Many of the Jesuits trained in consciousness techniques simply disappeared during the suppression. Some fled to remote locations where they could continue their research in secret. Others were absorbed into different church organizations, where their capabilities could be monitored and controlled. A few were eliminated entirely, their knowledge considered too dangerous to allow survival. But eliminating trained individuals couldn't eliminate the knowledge itself. The ancient texts remained in the Vatican archives, and the techniques they described continued to work for anyone with the dedication to master them. The Church found itself in the impossible position of possessing the most liberating knowledge in human history, while being institutionally committed to preventing its use. This explains the Vatican's obsessive interest in consciousness research throughout the modern era. They've funded studies in psychology, neuroscience, and quantum physics not to advance human knowledge, but to understand and control the mechanisms by which consciousness can expand beyond normal limitations. Every breakthrough in brain research, every discovery about the nature of consciousness, every development in human potential is immediately analyzed for its implications regarding the ancient techniques. The Church's modern research programs are focused on a single question: how can they maintain control over consciousness-expanding knowledge while preventing others from independently discovering the same techniques? They've developed pharmaceutical interventions that suppress the neurological functions necessary for consciousness expansion. They've created educational methodologies that fragment attention and prevent the sustained focus required for advanced techniques. They've established cultural programming that encourages people to seek external validation rather than developing internal wisdom. But their most sophisticated control mechanism is the deliberate creation of false spiritual movements that provide the appearance of consciousness development while actually preventing real advancement. New Age philosophies that promise enlightenment through passive meditation. Religious movements that encourage surrender to external authority rather than development of inner power. Therapeutic approaches that focus on emotional processing rather than consciousness expansion. These aren't accidental developments. They're carefully designed alternatives that channel human desire for spiritual growth into safe directions that pose no threat to existing power structures. People who might otherwise discover genuine consciousness-expanding techniques are diverted into movements that provide psychological satisfaction while maintaining their essential limitation. The Vatican's control over consciousness development extends far beyond religious organizations. They've influenced educational systems worldwide, ensuring that curricula focus on information consumption rather than attention development. They've shaped psychological research, directing it toward understanding mental illness rather than mental potential. They've guided technological development, promoting devices that fragment attention and create dependency rather than tools that enhance human capability. But perhaps their most insidious achievement has been the creation of scientific materialism as the dominant worldview of modern civilization. By promoting the belief that consciousness is merely a byproduct of brain activity, they've established a conceptual framework that makes consciousness expansion seem impossible. People who might otherwise explore their full potential are convinced that such capabilities don't exist. This materialist programming is so thorough that even individuals who accidentally stumble upon consciousness-expanding techniques often dismiss their experiences as hallucinations or psychological phenomena. They've been conditioned to reject evidence of their own expanded capabilities, to seek medical treatment for abilities that should be celebrated as natural human potential. The pre-Diluvian civilization understood consciousness as the fundamental force that shapes physical reality. They developed their advanced technology not through mechanical engineering, but through consciousness techniques that allowed them to influence matter and energy directly. Their cities, their transportation systems, their communication networks were all expressions of expanded human awareness, working in harmony with cosmic forces. This is why evidence of their civilization is so difficult to find through conventional archaeology. Their achievements weren't based on physical manipulation of materials, but on consciousness-directed organization of matter. When their civilization ended, their structures didn't leave massive ruins because they were maintained by consciousness rather than mechanical force. As the knowledge of consciousness techniques was lost, The physical expressions of their civilizations simply dissolved back into natural patterns. But the genetic and neurological capacity for these techniques survived in the human species. Every person born carries the potential to access the same capabilities that made the pre-Diluvian civilization so advanced. The only thing preventing this awakening is the systematic suppression of consciousness development that has been maintained for thousands of years. The Vatican's ultimate secret isn't about ancient maps or lost technology. It's about human potential that has been deliberately hidden to maintain artificial systems of control. The consciousness techniques preserved in their archives could transform every human being into a self-directing, self-empowering individual capable of accessing information and influencing reality in ways that would make external authority completely unnecessary. This is why the ancient knowledge must remain secret, not because it's dangerous to humanity, but because it's dangerous to the systems that profit from human limitation. Expanded consciousness naturally leads to cooperation, creativity, and abundance. It eliminates the scarcity and conflict that justify hierarchical control structures. It makes possible a civilization based on voluntary collaboration rather than imposed authority. The flood that destroyed the pre-Diluvian world may not have been a natural disaster at all. It may have been a deliberately engineered reset, designed to eliminate a level of human development that had become inconvenient to forces that preferred to rule over limited beings rather than collaborate with unlimited ones. The survivors were systematically prevented from recovering their full capabilities, and their descendants were conditioned to accept reduced potential as normal. But consciousness cannot be permanently suppressed. It continues to surface in individuals who spontaneously recover ancient techniques or independently develop new methods for expanding human awareness. Throughout history, such individuals have been identified and either co-opted or eliminated by institutions dedicated to maintaining limitation. The modern era presents unprecedented challenges to this control system. Global communication makes it increasingly difficult to suppress information. Scientific research is independently discovering principles that validate ancient consciousness techniques. Most importantly, growing numbers of individuals are spontaneously awakening to capabilities that they're not supposed to possess. The Vatican finds itself fighting a losing battle against the natural evolution of human consciousness. They can delay the awakening, but they cannot prevent it. The ancient knowledge preserved in their archives is beginning to surface through other channels. The genetic potential inherited from the pre-Diluvian civilization is activating in response to cosmic forces that no earthly authority can control. The maps of the pre-Diluvian world are just the beginning. Behind them lies a complete science of consciousness that could transform human civilization overnight. The question isn't whether this knowledge will eventually be revealed. The question is whether it will be released gradually by institutions trying to maintain some measure of control, or whether it will emerge spontaneously through individuals who no longer accept artificial limitations on their potential. The choice belongs not to the Vatican or any other authority, but to each individual who decides whether to accept the limitations they've been taught or to explore the vast potential that is their natural inheritance. The ancient maps show us where we came from. The consciousness techniques show us where we can go. The only question remaining is whether we have the courage to reclaim what was never really lost, only temporarily forgotten. But there's something else hidden in those Vatican vaults, something that makes their secrecy even more urgent and their control even more desperate. Because the consciousness techniques aren't just individual practices. They describe collective awakening processes that could transform entire populations simultaneously. The pre-Diluvian civilization didn't just develop individual capabilities. They created resonance fields that allowed groups, communities, and entire societies to access expanded consciousness together. These weren't meditation circles or spiritual gatherings as we might imagine them today. They were sophisticated technological systems based on geometric architecture, specific acoustic frequencies, and mathematical principles that could amplify individual consciousness into collective awareness. The ancient texts describe pyramid-like structures that weren't built for burial or worship, but as consciousness amplification devices that could synchronize the mental activity of hundreds or thousands of individuals simultaneously. Imagine walking into one of these ancient facilities. The walls would be precisely angled to create acoustic resonance at specific frequencies that naturally align human brainwaves. The floor would be embedded with crystalline structures that generate subtle electromagnetic fields, encouraging neural synchronization between individuals in the space. The ceiling would be designed to focus cosmic radiation in patterns that enhance mental clarity and expand perceptual boundaries. Within such a structure, individual consciousness would naturally merge into collective awareness, not the loss of personal identity, but the expansion of individual perception to include the experiences and knowledge of everyone present. A single person could access the memories, skills, and insights of an entire community. Complex problems could be solved through distributed intelligence that exceeded the capabilities of any individual mind. This is how the pre-Diluvian civilization achieved such remarkable coordination across vast distances. They weren't communicating through primitive signal fires or messenger systems. They were operating through consciousness networks that allowed instant information sharing between communities separated by thousands of miles. Their cities weren't just physical structures, but nodes in a global awareness grid that connected human consciousness across the entire planet. The Vatican's researchers understood the implications immediately. If such collective consciousness techniques could be reconstructed, they would eliminate every form of social control that depends on information restriction. Governments couldn't maintain power through propaganda when citizens could directly access truth through expanded awareness. Economic systems couldn't create artificial scarcity when communities could coordinate resource distribution through collective intelligence. Religious institutions couldn't claim exclusive access to divine truth when individuals could explore spiritual reality through direct experience. But the most terrifying aspect of these collective consciousness techniques wasn't their potential for social transformation. It was their tendency towards spontaneous activation. The ancient texts describe a phenomenon they called resonance cascading, where consciousness expansion in one individual or group would naturally trigger similar awakening in nearby populations. Enhanced awareness, once it reached a critical threshold, would spread like a contagion, activating dormant capabilities in people who had never been exposed to consciousness-expanding techniques. This explains the Church's obsessive focus on preventing even small groups from gathering for consciousness development practices. They understood that any successful awakening could trigger a chain reaction that would be impossible to contain. A few dozen people achieving genuine consciousness expansion could catalyze awakening in thousands, then millions, then potentially the entire human population. The historical evidence for this phenomenon is hidden throughout Church records of what they classify as spiritual emergencies. Sudden outbreaks of mystical experiences, prophetic abilities, and supernatural phenomena that would appear in communities without warning, spread rapidly through local populations, then mysteriously disappear as Church investigators arrived to provide pastoral care. These weren't religious revivals or mass hysteria. They were spontaneous activations of ancient consciousness capabilities, quickly suppressed before they could spread beyond containment. The Salem witch trials take on entirely new meaning in this context. The afflicted individuals weren't suffering from ergot poisoning or psychological disorders. They were experiencing spontaneous activation of psychic abilities that had been dormant in the human population for millennia. Their ability to perceive information at a distance, influence physical objects through intention, and access knowledge that they shouldn't have possessed represented a terrifying threat to established authority. The Church's response was swift and brutal. Not just the execution of individuals who displayed enhanced capabilities, but the systematic implementation of social controls designed to prevent such awakenings from occurring again. Educational systems that fragmented attention. Religious practices that encouraged external dependency rather than inner development. Cultural programming that taught people to fear and suppress any unusual mental experiences. Similar patterns appear throughout history whenever consciousness expansion begins to emerge spontaneously in human populations. The suppression of indigenous shamanic traditions, the elimination of mystery schools and esoteric knowledge systems, the persecution of individuals who claimed direct access to spiritual reality. All of these can be understood as defensive actions against the natural tendency of human consciousness to evolve beyond artificial limitations. But the Vatican's researchers discovered something even more disturbing in the ancient texts. The collective consciousness networks of the pre-Diluvian civilization weren't just local phenomena. They were connected to what the ancient documents describe as cosmic intelligence grids that extended far beyond Earth's boundaries. The enhanced human consciousness achieved through these techniques could interface with awareness systems that existed throughout the galaxy, accessing knowledge and capabilities that originated from sources beyond our planet. This revelation fundamentally altered the Church's understanding of what they were trying to suppress. They weren't just preventing the recovery of ancient human capabilities. They were preventing humanity from reconnecting with cosmic intelligence networks that could provide unlimited knowledge, unlimited energy, and unlimited potential for development. The pre-Diluvian civilization hadn't just been advanced by terrestrial standards. They had been part of a galactic community of conscious beings that operated on principles of cooperation and mutual enhancement. The implications were staggering. If humans could reconnect with these cosmic awareness networks, they would gain access to technologies, knowledge, and capabilities that would make every existing power structure obsolete overnight. Energy systems that could provide unlimited power without environmental damage. Transportation methods that could move people and materials across vast distances instantaneously. Communication systems that could connect human consciousness with intelligent beings throughout the galaxy. But perhaps most threatening of all, connection with cosmic intelligence would provide humans with direct access to truth about their origins, their purpose, and their potential. They would discover that the limitations they've accepted as normal are entirely artificial, imposed by systems designed to maintain control over beings whose natural capabilities far exceed what they've been taught to believe possible. The Vatican found itself protecting not just their own institutional authority, but an entire system of planetary control that depended on keeping humanity disconnected from their cosmic inheritance. The consciousness techniques preserved in their archives weren't just individual or collective human development methods. They were reconnection protocols that could restore humanity's place in a galactic community of conscious beings. This explains the extraordinary lengths to which the Church has gone to suppress consciousness development throughout history. They understood that any successful awakening could trigger not just social transformation on Earth, but reconnection with cosmic intelligence systems that would make human limitation impossible to maintain. The stakes weren't just political or religious authority. They were the continuation of an entire paradigm based on artificial scarcity and imposed control. The ancient texts describe the pre-Diluvian civilization's connection with what they called the Council of Worlds, a galactic network of conscious beings that operated on principles of voluntary cooperation and mutual development. Earth was part of this network until the catastrophic events that ended the advanced ancient civilization and severed humanity's connection with cosmic intelligence systems. But the severance wasn't permanent. The consciousness techniques preserved in the Vatican archives include specific protocols for re-establishing contact with galactic awareness networks. The pre-Diluvian civilization understood that their knowledge might be lost during times of upheaval, so they embedded reconnection instructions in their consciousness development practices. Anyone who fully mastered these techniques would automatically begin receiving guidance and support from cosmic intelligence sources. This is why the Church's suppression efforts have become increasingly desperate in recent decades. Growing numbers of individuals are spontaneously developing consciousness capabilities that put them in contact with intelligence sources beyond Earth. These people aren't following ancient protocols or studying esoteric texts. They're naturally evolving beyond the limitations that have been artificially imposed on human development. The modern UFO phenomenon takes on entirely new meaning in this context. These aren't random visits from curious extraterrestrials. They're reconnaissance missions from the galactic community, monitoring humanity's progress toward consciousness evolution and preparing for eventual reconnection with cosmic intelligence networks. The beings operating these craft aren't aliens in the sense we usually imagine. They're representatives of the cosmic awareness systems that humanity was once part of and is destined to rejoin. The Vatican's secret research programs have been tracking this phenomenon for decades, trying to understand and control the reconnection process. They've established contact with some of these cosmic intelligence representatives, not as equals seeking knowledge, but as negotiators trying to delay or prevent humanity's return to galactic consciousness networks. They understand that reconnection would eliminate their control systems, so they're working to maintain human limitation for as long as possible. But cosmic intelligence operates on principles that make such negotiations ultimately futile. The galactic community doesn't impose its will on developing civilizations, but it also doesn't allow artificial suppression of consciousness evolution to continue indefinitely. There are cosmic cycles, galactic rhythms, and universal principles that govern the development of conscious beings throughout the galaxy. Humanity's awakening isn't a matter of political negotiation. It's a natural evolutionary process that no earthly authority can permanently prevent. The consciousness techniques hidden in the Vatican archives include detailed information about these cosmic cycles and humanity's place within them. The pre-Diluvian civilization understood that their advanced development was part of a galactic awakening process that occurs periodically throughout cosmic history. They knew that even if their civilization was destroyed, the consciousness evolution process would eventually resume and restore humanity's connection with cosmic intelligence networks. The ancient maps showing the pre-Diluvian world aren't just geographical records. They're consciousness maps, showing the locations where galactic intelligence established contact points with human civilization. These sites remain active, continuing to broadcast awakening frequencies that can trigger consciousness expansion in individuals who visit them or even think about them with sufficient focus and intention. This explains why certain geographical locations continue to be associated with unusual phenomena, mystical experiences, and consciousness-altering effects thousands of years after the civilizations that originally activated them have disappeared. Places like Stonehenge, the Great Pyramid, Machu Picchu, and countless other ancient sites aren't just archaeological curiosities. They're active interfaces between human consciousness and galactic intelligence networks, waiting for individuals capable of receiving their transmissions. The Vatican has spent centuries trying to control access to these sites, not just through physical restrictions, but through cultural programming that teaches people to view them as historical artifacts rather than active consciousness interfaces. They've promoted archaeological interpretations that focus on primitive building techniques rather than advanced consciousness technologies. They've encouraged tourism that treats these locations as curiosities rather than opportunities for consciousness expansion. But cosmic intelligence can't be permanently blocked by human institutions. The awakening frequencies continue to broadcast from these ancient sites, and growing numbers of individuals are spontaneously receiving their transmissions. People visit these locations expecting to see interesting ruins and instead find themselves experiencing profound consciousness expansions that connect them with intelligent sources beyond Earth. The Vatican's monitoring systems have detected dramatic increases in these spontaneous awakening events over the past several decades. Their secret research facilities are working frantically to develop countermeasures, but they're fighting against cosmic forces that operate on scales far beyond human institutional authority. The galactic awakening process is accelerating, and no earthly power can prevent humanity's eventual reconnection with cosmic intelligence networks. The consciousness techniques preserved in the Vatican archives represent humanity's instruction manual for this reconnection process. They describe not just individual consciousness development, but collective awakening procedures that can prepare entire populations for integration with galactic awareness systems. The Pre-Diluvian civilization used these techniques to establish their connection with cosmic intelligence, and the same techniques remain available for humanity's current awakening process. But accessing these techniques requires more than just reading ancient texts. The consciousness capabilities they describe must be developed through practice, dedication, and willingness to expand beyond the limitations that most humans accept as normal. The Vatican understands that simply possessing the texts isn't dangerous, as long as people lack the consciousness development necessary to implement their instructions. This is why their suppression efforts focus on preventing consciousness development rather than hiding information. They've created educational systems that fragment attention and prevent the sustained focus necessary for consciousness expansion. They've established cultural norms that discourage inner exploration and promote external dependency. They've developed technological distractions that keep human attention scattered and superficial. But these suppression methods are becoming less effective as cosmic awakening energies intensify. Growing numbers of individuals are developing consciousness capabilities despite cultural programming designed to prevent such development. They're accessing information through direct intuition rather than external sources. They're developing abilities that allow them to perceive truth regardless of institutional attempts to control information. The Vatican finds itself in an impossible position. They possess knowledge that could facilitate humanity's awakening and reconnection with cosmic intelligence, but using that knowledge would eliminate their own authority. They're committed to maintaining control systems that cosmic intelligence considers artificial and temporary. They're trying to prevent an evolutionary process that operates according to universal principles beyond human manipulation. The outcome is inevitable. Humanity will reconnect with galactic consciousness networks, not because any earthly institution decides to allow it, but because cosmic intelligence operates according to principles that make such awakening a natural part of universal development. The only question is whether this reconnection will occur gradually, with minimal disruption to existing systems, or rapidly, with complete transformation of human civilization. The consciousness techniques hidden in the Vatican archives could facilitate a gradual awakening process that allows existing institutions to adapt rather than collapse. But accessing these techniques requires a level of cooperation and transparency that current control systems seem incapable of providing. The alternative is spontaneous awakening that bypasses institutional authority entirely, connecting individuals directly with cosmic intelligence sources that can provide all necessary guidance for consciousness development. The pre-Diluvian maps show us where we came from. The consciousness techniques show us where we're going. The cosmic intelligence connections show us who we really are. Not isolated beings struggling for survival on a single planet, but expressions of galactic awareness, temporarily experiencing limitation as part of a vast evolutionary experiment that spans the entire universe. The Vatican's secret isn't just about hidden knowledge, it's about hidden identity. They know that humans are cosmic beings with unlimited potential, temporarily playing roles as limited creatures in a carefully constructed illusion designed to explore the experience of separation and scarcity. The experiment is ending. The illusion is dissolving. The awakening process has begun, and no earthly authority can prevent its completion. The only question remaining is whether we'll awaken gradually, with guidance from institutions that understand the process, or spontaneously, through direct connection with cosmic intelligence that renders all external authority unnecessary. The choice belongs to each individual who decides whether to explore their true potential or continue accepting artificial limitations as real. The maps of the pre-Diluvian world are calling us home, not to a place, but to a state of consciousness, not to the past, but to a future where humanity reclaims its place in the galactic community of awakened beings. The Vatican has guarded this secret for centuries, but secrets can't survive in the light of expanding consciousness that naturally emerges when cosmic beings remember who they really are. The ancient consciousness techniques weren't just theoretical frameworks preserved in dusty manuscripts. They were practical methodologies that the Vatican has been secretly testing and refining for over 4 centuries. Deep beneath St. Peter's Basilica, in chambers that don't appear on any architectural plan, a select group of researchers has been conducting experiments that would revolutionize our understanding of human potential if they were ever made public. In 1643, just 9 years after Kircher's initial discoveries, Pope Innocent X authorized the construction of what Vatican insiders call the Sanctum Experimentum, the sacred laboratory. This wasn't a typical research facility. It was a precisely engineered environment designed to replicate the consciousness-amplifying conditions described in the pre-Diluvian texts. The walls were constructed using stone quarried from locations that the ancient maps identified as power nodes. The geometric proportions followed mathematical ratios found in the consciousness manuals. The acoustic properties were calibrated to generate the specific frequencies that the texts claimed could enhance human awareness. The results were immediate and terrifying. Researchers working in the Sanctum Experimentum began developing capabilities that challenged every assumption about human limitations. They could perceive events occurring thousands of miles away with photographic clarity. They could influence physical objects through focused intention alone. They could access vast stores of information that seemed to exist outside normal space and time. Most remarkably, they could communicate directly with intelligences that claimed to originate from beyond Earth's boundaries. But these weren't random psychic phenomena or religious visions. The capabilities followed predictable patterns described in the ancient texts. They could be triggered through specific techniques, enhanced through particular practices, and directed toward practical applications. The Vatican researchers weren't just experiencing expanded consciousness. They were learning to use it as a precision instrument for gathering information and influencing reality. The intelligence sources they contacted through these techniques provided information that proved devastatingly accurate. Military intelligence that allowed the Church to navigate European conflicts with supernatural precision. Economic predictions that enabled Vatican financial operations to prosper during periods of widespread turmoil. Political insights that gave church negotiators advantages that seemed almost miraculous to their opponents. But the most valuable intelligence concerned the consciousness awakening process itself. The non-terrestrial sources explained that human consciousness expansion was part of a cosmic cycle that occurred throughout the galaxy. Civilizations would develop to a certain point, then face a choice between limitation and awakening. Those that chose awakening would join galactic consciousness networks and gain access to unlimited knowledge and capabilities. Those that chose limitation would eventually face extinction as their artificial restrictions became unsustainable. According to these sources, humanity was approaching this critical choice point. The consciousness techniques preserved in the Vatican archives were activation codes that could trigger species-wide awakening if properly implemented. But the process required careful preparation because unprepared consciousness expansion could cause psychological fragmentation or complete dissolution of individual identity. The Vatican researchers found themselves in possession of the most powerful knowledge in human history, but using it carried risks that could destroy everything they were trying to protect. Consciousness expansion naturally led to the dissolution of hierarchical authority structures. Individuals with full access to their cosmic awareness wouldn't accept artificial limitations or external control. They would cooperate voluntarily based on expanded understanding, but they couldn't be coerced through traditional methods of manipulation. This created an impossible paradox for church leadership. they needed to use consciousness techniques to maintain their advantages over competing powers. But widespread use of these techniques would eliminate the very systems that gave them power. The solution was to develop what they called controlled awakening protocols that could provide enhanced capabilities while maintaining psychological dependency on church authority. Working with the non-terrestrial intelligences they had contacted, Vatican researchers developed modified consciousness techniques that provided some benefits of awakening while blocking access to information that might threaten institutional control. These modified practices could enhance individual capabilities without triggering the spontaneous authority questioning that accompanied full consciousness expansion. But the galactic intelligences had their own agenda. They weren't interested in helping human institutions maintain artificial control systems. They were working to facilitate humanity's integration into cosmic consciousness networks, which required the dissolution of all limitation-based power structures. The information they provided to Vatican researchers was carefully designed to gradually undermine the very systems the Church was trying to preserve. Over the following centuries, this cosmic influence manifested in ways that Church leadership didn't initially recognize. Scientific discoveries that challenged religious doctrine weren't just human curiosity pushing against institutional restrictions. They were guided revelations designed to prepare humanity for larger truths about reality. Technological developments that empowered individual communication and information access weren't accidental innovations. They were cosmic intelligence working through human creativity to break down the information control systems that prevented consciousness awakening. The Protestant Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the Information Age. All of these can be understood as stages in a cosmic awakening process that was gradually preparing humanity for reconnection with galactic intelligence networks. Each stage dissolved additional layers of artificial limitation, while building capabilities that would be necessary for cosmic consciousness integration. The Vatican researchers understood what was happening, but they were powerless to prevent it. The galactic intelligences operated on scales that made human institutional authority irrelevant. They could influence individual consciousness directly, bypassing all external control systems. They could inspire discoveries and innovations that advanced the awakening process, regardless of institutional resistance. They could gradually shift human culture toward greater freedom and expanded awareness without triggering the defensive reactions that direct intervention might provoke. By the 19th century, Vatican consciousness researchers realized they were fighting a losing battle. The cosmic awakening process was accelerating beyond their ability to control or contain. Growing numbers of individuals were spontaneously developing consciousness capabilities without exposure to church-controlled techniques. Scientific discoveries were approaching the point where cosmic intelligence contact would become undeniable. Technological developments were creating communication networks that could facilitate rapid consciousness expansion across global populations. The Church's strategy shifted from prevention to management. If they couldn't stop the awakening process, they would try to guide it in directions that preserve some measure of institutional relevance. They began selectively releasing ancient knowledge through carefully controlled channels, hoping to maintain influence over how cosmic truths were interpreted and implemented. This explains the Vatican's complex relationship with modern consciousness research. They've funded studies in psychology, neuroscience, and quantum physics that explore the nature of human awareness, but always with careful limitations that prevent researchers from discovering the full scope of human potential. They've supported meditation research that documents the benefits of contemplative practices while ensuring that the most powerful consciousness expansion techniques remain classified. They've influenced the development of psychiatric frameworks that pathologize unusual consciousness experiences, ensuring that individuals who spontaneously develop enhanced capabilities will seek medical treatment rather than exploring their expanded potential. They've promoted spiritual movements that provide the appearance of consciousness development while actually preventing access to the techniques that could trigger genuine awakening. But these management strategies are becoming increasingly ineffective as cosmic energies intensify. The galactic awakening process operates according to universal principles that make human limitation temporary and ultimately unsustainable. Growing numbers of individuals are developing consciousness capabilities that bypass all institutional control systems. They're accessing information directly through expanded awareness, rather than relying on external authorities for knowledge. The modern UFO disclosure movement represents a critical phase in this awakening process. The craft that governments are finally acknowledging aren't operated by extraterrestrial visitors in the sense we usually imagine. They're reconnaissance vehicles from galactic consciousness networks, monitoring humanity's progress toward cosmic awareness integration and preparing for the next phase of species development. The Vatican's secret research facilities have been tracking this phenomenon for decades, trying to understand the implications of open contact between humanity and galactic intelligence. They've established communication protocols with some of these cosmic representatives, not as equals seeking guidance, but as negotiators trying to manage the timing and scope of humanity's awakening process. But galactic intelligence doesn't negotiate with limitation-based power structures. It works to dissolve such systems by awakening the consciousness of the beings they attempt to control. The cosmic representatives aren't interested in preserving human institutional authority. They're working to facilitate humanity's transition into a galactic community based on voluntary cooperation and unlimited development potential. The consciousness techniques preserved in the Vatican archives include detailed protocols for this transition process. They describe how individual awakening leads to collective consciousness expansion, how collective expansion connects with galactic awareness networks, and how galactic connection transforms entire civilizations from limitation-based to abundance-based operational principles. The Pre-Diluvian civilization successfully completed this transition process before the catastrophic events that ended their visible presence on Earth. But they understood that consciousness evolution is cyclical, that civilizations naturally redevelop cosmic awareness capabilities even after apparent setbacks. They embedded reactivation protocols in the consciousness techniques they preserved, ensuring that future humans could successfully navigate the awakening process when cosmic conditions became favorable again. Those conditions are optimal now. The galactic alignment cycles that facilitate consciousness expansion are approaching their peak intensity. The technological infrastructure necessary for rapid global communication and coordination has been established. Most importantly, sufficient numbers of humans have developed consciousness capabilities to create the resonance fields necessary for species-wide awakening. The Vatican's researchers understand that they're witnessing the beginning of humanity's transformation into a cosmic civilization. The ancient maps showing the pre-Diluvian world aren't just historical records. They're blueprints for the expanded Earth that will emerge when human consciousness reconnects with galactic intelligence networks. The consciousness techniques aren't just individual development practices. They're activation protocols for the planetary awakening process that will restore humanity's place in the cosmic community. But this transformation doesn't require Vatican permission or institutional guidance. Cosmic intelligence operates through individual consciousness expansion that naturally spreads through resonance effects. Each person who develops enhanced awareness contributes to the collective awakening field that makes similar development easier for others. The process becomes self-sustaining once it reaches critical mass, regardless of institutional attempts to control or prevent it. The Church's ultimate choice isn't whether to allow human awakening. That process is already underway and cannot be stopped by earthly authority. Their choice is whether to facilitate the transition by releasing the knowledge they've been guarding, or to maintain secrecy while awakening occurs around them through other channels. The consciousness techniques hidden in their archives could help millions of people navigate the awakening process more smoothly, with less disruption to existing social structures. The cosmic intelligence protocols could provide guidance for establishing communication with galactic representatives who could offer unlimited knowledge and assistance. The pre-Diluvian maps could help identify locations where awakening energies are most concentrated, allowing for the establishment of consciousness development centers that could serve entire populations. But accessing this knowledge requires acknowledging that human potential has been artificially limited for millennia, that cosmic intelligence has been guiding human development toward awakening, and that the institutional authority systems that have controlled human civilization are temporary structures that will naturally dissolve as consciousness expands. The Vatican stands at the threshold of the most momentous decision in human history. They possess knowledge that could transform every human being into a conscious cosmic citizen with unlimited potential for development and creation. They have communication protocols that could establish open dialogue with galactic intelligence networks that offer unlimited guidance and assistance. They hold the keys to humanity's cosmic inheritance, the restoration of capabilities that make scarcity, conflict, and limitation completely unnecessary. The question isn't whether they have this knowledge. The evidence is overwhelming that they've been secretly researching and applying consciousness expansion techniques for centuries. The question isn't whether cosmic intelligence is real. Their own research facilities have been in contact with galactic representatives for decades. The question isn't whether human awakening is possible. Growing numbers of individuals are spontaneously developing cosmic consciousness capabilities despite all attempts to prevent such development. The only question is whether the Vatican will choose to be part of humanity's awakening process or will attempt to maintain limitation-based authority systems that cosmic intelligence considers artificial and temporary. The awakening will continue regardless of their choice, but their participation could make the transition smoother for millions of people who are currently struggling to understand consciousness expansion experiences without proper guidance or support. The cosmic intelligence sources that Vatican researchers have been consulting for centuries have made their position clear. They're not interested in preserving human limitation systems, but they're willing to work with any institution that genuinely commits to facilitating consciousness awakening. The knowledge they offer is unlimited, but it's only available to those who demonstrate readiness to move beyond control-based relationships toward cooperation-based cosmic citizenship. The pre-Diluvian civilization made this transition successfully, developing technologies and capabilities that seem miraculous to later humans who had forgotten their cosmic inheritance. The consciousness techniques they preserved aren't just historical curiosities. They're practical instruction manuals for the awakening process that every human being is capable of completing. The maps showing their world aren't just geographical records. They're consciousness maps showing the expanded reality that becomes accessible when human awareness reconnects with cosmic intelligence networks. The lands they depict still exist, not as physical territories, but as states of consciousness that can be accessed through the techniques they developed. The Vatican has been guarding these secrets for centuries, but secrets can't survive the cosmic awakening process that naturally expands human consciousness beyond all artificial limitations. The knowledge they've been hiding will emerge through other channels as growing numbers of individuals develop direct access to cosmic intelligence sources. The choice they face isn't whether to release this knowledge. The choice is whether to participate consciously in humanity's cosmic awakening, or to resist a process that will continue with or without their cooperation. The maps of the pre-Diluvian world are calling humanity home to its cosmic inheritance. The consciousness techniques are activating in individuals worldwide. The galactic intelligence networks are preparing for humanity's return to conscious cosmic citizenship. The greatest secret in human history is about to become common knowledge, not through institutional revelation, but through the natural awakening of human consciousness to its unlimited cosmic potential. The Vatican can either facilitate this process by sharing the knowledge they've been guarding, or they can watch it unfold through channels that make their secrecy irrelevant. The cosmic awakening has begun, The only question remaining is who will have the wisdom to participate consciously in humanity's transformation from a limited planetary species to an unlimited cosmic civilization. The pre-Diluvian maps aren't just showing us where we came from. They're showing us where we're going, and that journey begins with the courage to reclaim the consciousness capabilities that are our natural cosmic inheritance. The year is 2024, and deep within a climate-controlled vault beneath Vatican City, a cardinal stares at a computer screen displaying satellite imagery that shouldn't exist. The images show landmasses beneath the ocean floor, continental shelves that match perfectly with maps drawn 500 years ago. Maps that showed continents where modern science says only water has existed for millions of years. His hands shake, not from age, but from the realization that everything they've hidden is being discovered anyway, piece by piece, through technologies that make concealment impossible. Because here's what the Vatican never anticipated when they locked away those ancient cartographic treasures. The Earth itself would become the ultimate whistleblower. Sonar mapping of ocean floors reveals massive structures that align exactly with the civilizations marked on pre-Diluvian charts. Satellite penetration of polar ice caps shows river systems and mountain ranges that match the geographical features depicted in manuscripts that were supposed to remain buried forever. Ground-penetrating radar discovers underground chambers and tunnel networks at locations that the secret maps identified as major population centers thousands of years before any known civilization should have existed there. The evidence is erupting from the planet itself, and no amount of institutional secrecy can contain geological truth. In 2019, researchers using advanced sonar equipment discovered what appears to be a massive city buried beneath 2 miles of ice in Antarctica. The structures follow geometric patterns that match architectural principles found in ancient texts that have been classified at the highest levels of church secrecy for centuries. When the discovery was reported to international scientific committees, the research was immediately classified and the team members were reassigned to different projects in different countries, but the data had already been copied. Images of the Antarctic structures began circulating through underground networks of researchers who understood they were looking at evidence of pre-flood civilization. The geometric precision of these buried buildings, the mathematical relationships between their positions, the advanced engineering principles evident in their construction, all of it confirmed what the Vatican's secret archives had been documenting for 500 years. Similar discoveries are occurring worldwide with increasing frequency. Off the coast of Japan, underwater ruins show construction techniques that shouldn't have existed when sea levels were low enough for the sites to be on dry land. Near the Bahamas, sonar reveals massive stone foundations following grid patterns that suggest urban planning on a scale that rivals modern cities. In the Mediterranean, researchers have identified what appears to be an entire sunken continent, complete with river deltas, mountain ranges, and coastal features that match descriptions found in ancient texts that have never been made public. Each discovery creates a crisis for institutions that have built their authority on controlling information about human origins. Because these aren't just archaeological curiosities, they're evidence of technological capabilities that challenge every assumption about the development of human civilization. The precision stone cutting found in these underwater sites requires tools and techniques that mainstream archaeology insists didn't exist until modern times. The mathematical relationships embedded in their layouts demonstrate knowledge of advanced geometry that supposedly wasn't developed until classical Greece. But perhaps most disturbing are the astronomical alignments. These buried and sunken structures are positioned to track celestial events with accuracy that requires understanding of cosmic cycles spanning thousands of years. They account for precession, solar variations, and planetary movements in ways that suggest their builders possessed comprehensive knowledge of Earth's place in the solar system. knowledge that the Vatican's secret astronomical texts have been documenting and hiding since the Renaissance. The Church's response to these discoveries follows predictable patterns. Scientific expeditions that get too close to sensitive sites suddenly lose their funding. Researchers who publish preliminary findings about advanced ancient capabilities find themselves facing career-ending controversies. Archaeological sites that might provide evidence of pre-Diluvian civilization become restricted areas due to environmental concerns or national security issues. But suppression is becoming increasingly difficult in an age of global communication and citizen science. Satellite imagery is available to anyone with internet access. Sonar equipment can be purchased by private individuals. Ground-penetrating radar technology is becoming affordable for amateur researchers. Most importantly, the sheer volume of anomalous discoveries is overwhelming the capacity of any institution to control information flow. The Vatican finds itself fighting a losing battle against technological progress that makes secrecy impossible. The same satellite systems that reveal ancient structures beneath ice and water also expose the movements of church researchers who travel to these sites for purposes that are never officially acknowledged. Digital communication networks allow researchers worldwide to share discoveries instantly, bypassing traditional academic channels that could be controlled or censored. Even more challenging is the emergence of artificial intelligence systems that can analyze vast amounts of geological and archaeological data without the biases that human researchers might bring to potentially controversial discoveries. AI pattern recognition has identified thousands of sites worldwide that show characteristics consistent with advanced ancient construction. These systems don't care about protecting institutional narratives. They simply report what the data reveals, and what they're revealing is evidence of sophisticated pre-flood civilization on every continent. The implications extend far beyond archaeology or ancient history. If advanced human civilization existed before the last ice age, then our understanding of climate change, geological processes, and planetary evolution needs fundamental revision. The flood that ended the pre-Diluvian world wasn't just a regional disaster described in religious texts. It was a global catastrophe that reset human development and erased most evidence of earlier technological achievement. Geological evidence supports this catastrophic scenario. Ice core samples show evidence of massive atmospheric disturbances around 12,000 years ago. Marine fossils found at high elevations indicate rapid sea level changes that would have inundated coastal civilizations worldwide. Magnetic field data suggests the planet experienced significant electromagnetic disruption that would have affected any technology dependent on electronic systems. But here's what makes the Vatican's position increasingly untenable. The same geological forces that buried evidence of pre-Diluvian civilization are now exposing it again. Climate change is melting ice caps that have concealed ancient structures for millennia. Rising sea levels are revealing underwater ruins that were previously inaccessible. Geological activity is bringing buried artifacts to the surface in locations that have been stable for thousands of years. The Earth itself is conducting the disclosure that human institutions have been preventing. Every earthquake that shifts sediment layers, every volcanic eruption that exposes ancient strata, every glacier that melts to reveal what lies beneath. All of these natural processes are participating in a planetary revelation that no amount of secrecy can prevent. And the timing isn't coincidental. The same cosmic cycles that the pre-Diluvian civilization mapped with such precision are reaching another critical phase. Solar activity is intensifying in patterns that match ancient predictions about consciousness awakening periods. Magnetic field fluctuations are creating conditions that enhance human sensitivity to electromagnetic phenomena. Planetary alignments are approaching configurations that ancient texts describe as optimal for expanded awareness development. The Vatican's astronomical researchers understand these connections better than anyone. Their secret observatories have been tracking these cosmic cycles for centuries, using knowledge preserved from the pre-Diluvian civilization to predict and prepare for the awakening period that is now beginning. They know that the geological disclosure of ancient evidence is synchronized with consciousness expansion processes that will make institutional control of information impossible, because expanded human awareness naturally includes the ability to perceive truth, regardless of external attempts at deception or concealment. Individuals developing enhanced consciousness capabilities can access information directly through intuitive channels that bypass all traditional information control systems. They can perceive the authenticity of ancient sites, understand the significance of geological discoveries, and recognize the implications of archaeological evidence without requiring official interpretation or academic approval. This is why the Vatican's suppression efforts have become increasingly desperate and increasingly futile. They're not just fighting against technological disclosure of ancient evidence. They're fighting against consciousness evolution that makes their authority irrelevant. Each individual who develops expanded awareness becomes immune to information control systems that depend on limiting human perception to officially approved narratives. The pre-Diluvian maps hidden in Vatican archives show more than just geographical features of the ancient world. They show consciousness territories, states of awareness that become accessible when human perception expands beyond artificial limitations. The lands depicted in these maps still exist, not as physical locations buried beneath ice and water, but as consciousness potentials that can be accessed through the same techniques that made the ancient civilization so advanced. The flood that destroyed the visible aspects of pre-Diluvian civilization couldn't eliminate the consciousness capabilities that created it. Those capabilities remain dormant in human genetic and neurological potential, waiting for cosmic conditions that would allow their reactivation. Those conditions are optimal now, which explains why evidence of ancient advancement is emerging simultaneously with consciousness expansion in growing numbers of individuals worldwide. The Vatican's ultimate secret isn't about hidden maps or ancient technologies. It's about human potential that has been systematically suppressed to maintain artificial scarcity in control systems. The consciousness capabilities that enabled pre-Diluvian civilization to develop advanced technologies and global coordination remain available to any individual willing to explore beyond the limitations they've been taught to accept as normal. But accessing these capabilities requires more than just intellectual understanding of ancient techniques. It requires practical development of consciousness expansion abilities through sustained practice and dedication. The Vatican understands that simply releasing information about ancient methods isn't dangerous, as long as people lack the attention, development, and inner discipline necessary to implement such techniques successfully. This is why their suppression efforts focus on preventing consciousness development rather than hiding historical information. They've created cultural conditions that fragment human attention, discourage sustained inner exploration, and promote dependency on external authorities for knowledge and guidance. Educational systems that reward information consumption rather than awareness development. Entertainment technologies that scatter attention rather than enhancing focus. Social structures that encourage competition and conflict rather than the cooperation that naturally emerges from expanded consciousness. But these suppression methods are becoming ineffective as cosmic awakening energies intensify. Growing numbers of individuals are spontaneously developing consciousness capabilities despite cultural programming designed to prevent such development. They're accessing ancient knowledge through direct intuitive channels, rather than historical research. They're developing abilities that allow them to perceive truth about human origins and potential, regardless of institutional attempts to control information. The geological disclosure of ancient evidence is serving as external confirmation of insights that consciousness expansion provides directly. Individuals who develop enhanced awareness don't need archaeological proof of advanced ancient civilization. They can perceive the reality of human potential through direct experience. But the physical evidence emerging from Earth's geological processes provides validation for those who are still developing such capabilities. This creates a feedback loop that accelerates both geological disclosure and consciousness awakening. Physical evidence of ancient advancement encourages more people to explore their own potential for consciousness expansion. Consciousness expansion enables more people to recognize the significance of geological discoveries and to seek out additional evidence. The process becomes self-reinforcing, with each element supporting and accelerating the others. The Vatican finds itself caught in this accelerating cycle, unable to prevent either geological disclosure or consciousness awakening. Their response has shifted from prevention to damage control, trying to manage how ancient evidence is interpreted and how consciousness expansion is understood. They've promoted archaeological theories that minimize the technological sophistication of ancient civilizations. They've influenced consciousness research to focus on therapeutic applications rather than human potential development. But these management strategies are failing as the scope and implications of discoveries become undeniable. Underwater cities that show evidence of advanced engineering can't be dismissed as primitive settlements. Astronomical alignments that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of cosmic cycles can't be explained through accidental construction. Consciousness capabilities that provide direct access to information and abilities can't be reduced to psychological phenomena. The truth about human origins and potential is emerging through multiple channels simultaneously, creating a convergence of evidence that overwhelms any attempt at institutional control. Geological discoveries confirm what consciousness expansion reveals directly. Archaeological evidence supports what ancient texts describe symbolically. Technological analysis validates what intuitive perception recognizes immediately. The pre-Diluvian world is being reconstructed not just through hidden Vatican maps, but through the planetary disclosure process that is revealing ancient evidence and awakening ancient capabilities in human beings worldwide. The maps show us where we came from, but the consciousness techniques show us where we're going. Both point toward the same destination: the restoration of human civilization to cosmic awareness levels that make limitation and conflict unnecessary. The Vatican has guarded these secrets for centuries, but the cosmic cycles that govern consciousness evolution operate according to universal principles that make such suppression temporary. The awakening process has begun, accelerated by geological forces that are exposing ancient evidence and cosmic energies that are activating ancient capabilities in human awareness. The greatest archaeological discovery in human history isn't happening in any specific location. It's happening within human consciousness itself, as growing numbers of individuals remember capabilities that were never really lost, only temporarily forgotten. The pre-Diluvian maps aren't just showing us ancient geography. They're showing us the expanded reality that becomes accessible when human awareness reconnects with its cosmic inheritance. The flood that ended the visible aspects of ancient civilization was never meant to be permanent. It was a reset that allowed consciousness to explore the experience of limitation while preserving the knowledge and capabilities necessary for eventual awakening. That awakening is now beginning, supported by geological disclosure that confirms what consciousness expansion reveals directly. Humanity is far more ancient, far more capable, and far more cosmic than we've been taught to believe. The Vatican's maps of the pre-Diluvian Earth show us a world where human potential was fully expressed in harmony with planetary and cosmic forces. That world is returning, not as a physical restoration of ancient geography, but as a consciousness restoration of ancient capabilities. The maps were never really about land and water. They were about states of awareness that transcend all artificial limitations and connect human consciousness with the unlimited creative potential that is our true cosmic inheritance. The secrets can't remain hidden because the truth is encoded in human consciousness itself, waiting for cosmic conditions that would allow its natural emergence. Those conditions are optimal now, which is why evidence of ancient advancement is surfacing from geological layers, while consciousness capabilities are awakening in human awareness. The pre-Diluvian world is returning through both channels simultaneously, creating a convergence that no earthly authority can prevent or control. The Vatican stands at the threshold of humanity's most profound transformation, holding knowledge that could facilitate the awakening process, but unwilling to release information that would eliminate their authority to control it. The choice they face isn't whether to allow human awakening. That process is already underway and cannot be stopped. Their choice is whether to participate consciously in facilitating humanity's cosmic awakening, or to resist a transformation that will continue with or without their cooperation. The geological disclosure continues. The consciousness awakening accelerates. The cosmic cycles that govern both processes are approaching their optimal phase. The pre-Diluvian maps hidden in Vatican archives aren't just historical documents. They're activation codes for a planetary awakening process that will restore humanity to conscious cosmic citizenship, whether earthly institutions choose to facilitate that process or not. The ancient maps, hidden beneath Vatican stone, aren't just calling to archaeologists and conspiracy theorists anymore. They're calling to you. Because every time you feel that inexplicable pull toward ancient mysteries, every time you question the sanitized version of history they taught you in school, every time you sense there's something magnificent about human potential that you've never been allowed to explore, you're responding to the same cosmic awakening frequencies that are dissolving the Vatican's centuries-old walls of secrecy. This isn't just about what happened 12,000 years ago. This is about what's happening right now, in this moment, as you absorb these words. The same consciousness expansion capabilities that allowed the pre-Diluvian civilization to map continents and navigate by stars are stirring within you. The same cosmic intelligence networks that guided ancient architects in building monuments that still defy explanation are broadcasting activation frequencies that your awareness is designed to receive. You feel it, don't you? That sense that reality is far stranger and far more magnificent than the limited version you've been sold. That feeling isn't imagination or wishful thinking. It's your consciousness recognizing truth that resonates with genetic memories encoded in your very DNA. Memories of a time when humans weren't struggling to survive on a hostile planet, but were conscious participants in a cosmic community that spanned galaxies. The Vatican's secret isn't really about ancient maps at all. It's about you. It's about the unlimited potential that exists within every human being, potential that has been systematically suppressed because individuals who access their full capabilities don't need external authorities to tell them what to think, what to believe, or how to live their lives. They become sovereign beings, capable of accessing information directly, creating abundance through consciousness, and cooperating voluntarily based on expanded understanding, rather than coercion through artificial scarcity. This is why the maps had to remain hidden. Not because they show lost continents or ancient cities, but because they remind us of what humans are capable of achieving when we operate from expanded consciousness rather than limited fear-based thinking. The pre-Diluvian civilization didn't develop advanced technology through mechanical engineering alone. They developed it through consciousness capabilities that allowed them to work in harmony with natural forces, creating sustainable abundance that lasted for millennia. Every meditation you've ever attempted, every moment of intuitive insight you've experienced, every time you felt connected to something larger than your individual existence, these are glimpses of the consciousness capabilities that were once humanity's natural operating system. The techniques for developing these abilities weren't lost in the flood. They were hidden by institutions that understood that conscious, capable individuals don't require management by external authorities. But the cosmic cycles that govern consciousness evolution operate according to universal principles that make suppression temporary. The awakening energies that are intensifying throughout our solar system don't recognize human institutional authority. They respond to individual readiness, to genuine desire for truth, to willingness to explore beyond the boundaries of what you've been taught is possible. You're reading these words because some part of you already knows that the official version of human history is incomplete. Some part of you recognizes that the capabilities emerging in individuals worldwide aren't supernatural phenomena, but natural potentials that have been dormant during humanity's collective amnesia about its cosmic origins. Some part of you understands that the pre-Diluvian maps aren't just showing us where we came from, but pointing toward where we're headed as we reclaim our inheritance as conscious cosmic citizens. The Vatican's researchers know that the awakening process has reached the point where it becomes self-sustaining. Each individual who develops expanded consciousness contributes to a collective field that makes similar development easier for others. The resonance effects are accelerating, creating a cascade of awakening that no earthly institution can prevent or control. This is why their suppression efforts have become increasingly desperate and increasingly futile. Because the truth about human potential can't be contained within the walls of any archive. It's encoded in the structure of consciousness itself, waiting for cosmic conditions that would allow its natural emergence. Those conditions are optimal now, which is why individuals worldwide are spontaneously developing abilities that seem impossible according to the limited worldview they've been taught to accept. The maps of the pre-Diluvian Earth show us a world where human consciousness operated at its full potential, creating technologies and civilizations that worked in harmony with planetary and cosmic forces. That world is returning, not as a physical restoration of ancient geography, but as a consciousness restoration of ancient capabilities. The flood that reset human development was never meant to be permanent. It was a temporary limitation that allowed consciousness to explore the experience of separation while preserving the knowledge necessary for eventual reunification with cosmic intelligence networks. You are part of this awakening process, whether you fully understand it yet or not. Your curiosity about these mysteries, your sense that reality is far more magnificent than the official version, your intuitive recognition that human potential extends far beyond current limitations. All of these are signs that your consciousness is responding to the same cosmic frequencies that guided the builders of the ancient world. The Vatican has spent centuries trying to prevent this awakening, but they're fighting against universal forces that operate on scales far beyond human institutional authority. The cosmic intelligence that guided pre-Diluvian civilization is still broadcasting, still available to any individual with the awareness development necessary to receive its transmissions. The techniques for developing such awareness weren't destroyed in the flood. They were preserved in consciousness itself, waiting for individuals ready to explore beyond the artificial boundaries that have been imposed on human development. This is your invitation to participate consciously in humanity's cosmic awakening. Not through joining any organization or following any external authority, but through developing the consciousness capabilities that are your natural inheritance as a cosmic being temporarily experiencing limitation. The pre-Diluvian maps aren't just historical curiosities hidden in Vatican vaults. They're activation codes for remembering who you really are and what you're truly capable of achieving. The awakening has begun. The cosmic cycles are optimal. The geological disclosure is accelerating. The consciousness expansion is spreading through resonance effects that make institutional control impossible. The only question is whether you'll choose to explore your unlimited potential or continue accepting artificial limitations as real. The choice is yours, but understand that choosing limitation when unlimited potential beckons isn't neutral. It's an active decision to remain smaller than you actually are. And the cosmic forces that are awakening humanity don't wait for permission or comfort levels. They respond to readiness, to genuine desire for truth, to the courage required to step beyond everything you've been conditioned to believe about yourself and your world. Right now, as you process these revelations, something fundamental is shifting in your awareness. You can feel it, can't you? that subtle but unmistakable sense that you're standing at a threshold. That what you do with this information will determine not just what you understand about the past, but who you become in the future. This isn't hyperbole or mystical speculation. This is the practical reality of consciousness evolution in action. Every individual who genuinely grasps the implications of what's been hidden from humanity becomes a catalyst for further awakening. Your expanded understanding creates ripple effects that influence others, contributing to the collective field that makes similar revelations possible for people you'll never meet. The Vatican's researchers have documented this phenomenon extensively in their classified studies. They call it consciousness contagion, the way that expanded awareness spreads through populations without any direct communication or teaching. One person genuinely awakening to their cosmic potential can trigger similar awakenings in hundreds or thousands of others through purely energetic resonance effects. This is why they've worked so desperately to prevent even small numbers of individuals from accessing the complete truth about human origins and capabilities. They understood that once a critical mass of people developed expanded consciousness, the suppression systems would become impossible to maintain. The awakened individuals wouldn't need to rebel against existing authorities. They would simply outgrow the need for such authorities entirely, and we're approaching that critical mass now. The exponential growth in consciousness expansion that began accelerating in recent decades has reached the point where suppression creates more awakening than it prevents. Every attempt to hide information triggers more curiosity. Every effort to discredit discoveries generates more investigation. Every denial of obvious evidence causes more people to question what else they're being lied to about. The Vatican finds itself in the impossible position of possessing knowledge that could guide humanity through this transition smoothly, but being unable to release that knowledge without eliminating their own relevance. They're holding the instruction manual for conscious evolution, while watching humanity rediscover those same capabilities through direct experience and intuitive development. But here's what they never anticipated. The cosmic intelligence networks that guided pre-Diluvian civilization aren't dependent on any earthly institution for contact with awakening humans. The galactic awareness systems that the ancient maps were designed to help humans reconnect with are still broadcasting, still available, still offering unlimited guidance to anyone with the consciousness development necessary to receive their transmissions. You don't need Vatican permission to explore your cosmic inheritance. You don't need access to their hidden archives to develop expanded awareness capabilities. You don't need institutional validation to recognize truth when it resonates with the deepest levels of your being. The same cosmic intelligence that guided ancient architects in creating monuments that still inspire awe is available to guide you in creating whatever expression of expanded human potential feels authentic to your unique path. The pre-Diluvian maps weren't just geographical charts, they were consciousness maps, showing the territories of awareness that become accessible when human perception expands beyond artificially imposed limitations. Those territories still exist, not as physical locations that were destroyed in ancient floods, but as states of consciousness that can be accessed through the same techniques that made the ancient civilizations so remarkably advanced. Every time you quiet your mind and listen to the deeper intelligence that operates beyond ordinary thinking, you're accessing the same awareness that guided pre-Diluvian astronomers in mapping cosmic cycles with mathematical precision. Every time you trust your intuitive knowing over external authorities who claim exclusive access to truth, you're exercising the same sovereignty that allowed ancient humans to develop technologies we're still trying to understand. Every time you choose cooperation over competition, abundance consciousness over scarcity thinking, love over fear, you're aligning with the same cosmic principles that sustained advanced civilization for millennia, before artificial limitation systems were imposed on human development. The awakening isn't something that might happen in some distant future. It's happening now, in this moment, as your consciousness processes information that expands your understanding of what's possible. The cosmic cycles that govern this evolution have aligned in ways that make rapid consciousness expansion not just possible, but inevitable for individuals who choose to participate consciously in the process. The Vatican's maps of the pre-Diluvian world are calling you home, not to a place that existed thousands of years ago, but to a state of consciousness that exists right now, waiting for you to remember who you really are. The flood that reset human civilization couldn't touch the unlimited potential that exists within consciousness itself. That potential has been waiting through all the centuries of suppression and limitation, preserved in the deepest levels of your being, ready to emerge when cosmic conditions became favorable again. Those conditions are optimal now. The question isn't whether you're capable of consciousness expansion. Every human carries that potential as their birthright. The question is whether you're ready to embrace capabilities that will transform not just your understanding of reality, but your entire experience of being human. The ancient secrets are revealing themselves through geological disclosure, through consciousness awakening, through cosmic intelligence contact that bypasses all institutional gatekeepers. The Vatican's centuries of concealment are crumbling before forces that operate according to universal principles no earthly authority can control. You're witnessing the end of humanity's collective amnesia about its cosmic origins and unlimited potential. You're participating in the restoration of capabilities that make scarcity, conflict, and limitation completely unnecessary. You're helping to birth a civilization based on conscious cooperation with cosmic intelligence, rather than unconscious subjugation to artificial control systems. The pre-Diluvian maps, hidden in Vatican archives, aren't just showing us where we came from. They're showing us where we're going. And that journey begins with your decision to explore the unlimited potential that has always existed within you, waiting for this moment of cosmic alignment when remembering becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The trembling in that cardinal's hands wasn't just fear, it was recognition. Recognition that the greatest cover-up in human history was finally crumbling, not through revolution or rebellion, but through the simple, inexorable process of truth emerging from the earth itself. And as he stared at those satellite images matching maps that should never have existed, he realized something that chilled him more than any ancient secret. The awakening wasn't coming, it was already here. What started as whispers in academic circles has become a roar that no institution can silence. From the Antarctic ice, revealing impossible structures to the ocean floors, mapping themselves through technology the Vatican never anticipated. Every discovery confirms what those hidden maps have been screaming for centuries. We are not the first. We are not the pinnacle. We are the inheritors of something so magnificent that its very existence threatens every power structure built on the lie of human limitation. But here's what makes this moment unlike any other in recorded history. You don't need to wait for official disclosure. You don't need Vatican permission to explore what's already awakening within you. You don't need archaeological proof to access capabilities that exist in your consciousness right now. The same cosmic intelligence that guided those ancient cartographers is broadcasting through every fiber of your being, waiting for you to remember that you were never meant to be small. The maps were never really about geography. They were about possibility, about the landscapes of consciousness that open when you stop accepting artificial boundaries as real, about the territories of human potential that become accessible when you realize that everything you've been taught about limitation is a carefully constructed illusion designed to keep you from discovering what you're truly capable of. Right now, in this moment, as these words reshape your understanding of what's possible, you're participating in the greatest disclosure event in human history. Not as a passive observer, but as an active participant in consciousness evolution that's spreading across the planet like wildfire through a forest that's been waiting centuries to burn. The Vatican's secret is out, not because they chose to reveal it, but because cosmic forces operating on scales beyond human authority have made concealment impossible. The pre-Diluvian world isn't returning as a physical restoration of ancient continents. It's returning as an awakening of ancient capabilities within human consciousness itself. And you, having journeyed this far into humanity's hidden history, are now part of that return. The question isn't what the Vatican will choose to do with their crumbling secrets. The question is what you'll choose to do with the unlimited potential that's awakening within you. Because the maps of the pre-Diluvian Earth aren't just showing us where we came from, they're showing us who we're becoming. And that transformation begins now with your next breath, your next thought, your next choice to embrace the cosmic inheritance that has always been yours. The ancient world is calling. Are you ready to answer?